Okay, so I'm here in our province's beautiful capital, Victoria, with BC Conservative leadership candidate Peter Milobar. Peter, thanks for joining me.
Absolutely. Great to be out on a nice sunny day for a walk. Sorry.
Let's jump right into it.
Yeah.
So, DRIPA,
Yes.
you're the only candidate in the race who voted for DRIPA back in 2019.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, why did you vote for it then, and what's changed in those 6 years since?
Yeah. Well, first off, I was the only one that voted for it in 2019 because I was the only one in this race that actually had a seat in the legislature in 2019 or 2020 or 2024. So, yeah, being the only MLA in the race that's been here since 2017 means I have an actual voting record on DRIPA and lots of other things. DRIPA at the time, we went through a lot as a caucus talking about it, lots of discussions. Alice Ross was in that caucus as well. We had lawyers in that caucus that were questioning it, advising around it. Ultimately, we decided as a group that we would give it a shot to see, despite some concerns that we had even at the time, based on answers from the government as to what they felt the impact would or wouldn't be, and how it would be implemented. What we saw moving forward from there, though, was anything but. So in 2021, the Interpretation Act changes came in, which dramatically changed how the courts and ministers were supposed to interpret DRIPA in relation to every law in British Columbia. That was given 14 minutes of debate and deemed to be passed, whether we liked it or not. Then we had Land Act changes proposed. We had the Haida Agreement come forward. We had Water Act changes that were being proposed, Mineral Tenure Act changes, all those types of areas that I opposed, voted against when votes happened or pushed back hard enough to get the government to back down on. So, yes, I voted for one piece, but in the 6 years since, a lot has happened, and that is why in 2024, John Russett asked me to run for the BC Conservatives, and we talked about DRIPA and repealing DRIPA. I knew then that would be something we'd be doing, and I agreed because by then, became very clear it had to be repealed.
And so you've all promised to repeal DRIPA if you get in. But what happens next? Do you bring in new legislation, or how do you continue the process of reconciliation?
Yeah, I think we still need more legislation, not so much tied to DRIPA, but tied to what we've seen with the Cowichan case in terms of private property rights being concerned for everybody based on court rulings. So we need to actually protect those private property rights with legislation. But we also have to recognize that post DRIPA on the project and on what goes on the land base, there's still a constitutional obligation based on 1982 changes, duty to consult by the Crown, by the province. And so we still will have to do that. What I've been talking about is basing those timelines and decision-making and what consultation looks like based on court rulings that have been successful in the eyes of the province, in terms of the province and a project have been taken to court, saying by a nation saying that a project shouldn't proceed, we weren't consulted properly. And the courts have ruled, no, in fact, you were consulted properly once they looked at everything that had happened in that consultation framework. So that's what I'm talking about, is relying on successful court rulings where the province and the project were deemed to have been found to have consulted properly, and then that decision-making was still allowed to proceed. So that's really what my version of a post-DRIPA world looks like, where we're still working with Indigenous communities, working with projects, working with non-Indigenous communities to move economic growth forward for the province.
And, some First Nations groups have vowed to engage in collective resistance if any changes are made to DRIPA. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think again, Indigenous peoples and nations and communities are not all thinking alike every time on every topic. So I know there's others out there that want to see projects move forward, that find DRIPA a bit of an impediment right now, because even projects they want to proceed with have a neighboring nation or a farther away nation putting up resistance to it based on the provisions of DRIPA. So I think, yes, it'll be difficult in the early days, but I think we can get through that when nations realize we're still operating in good faith, we're not taking away any of their constitutional rights, and that we're actually still trying to move projects forward in a good faith way. I think that will cut through a lot of that upheaval in the early days.
And so, we're seeing right now that even U.S. First Nations are using DRIPA to have a say in projects in BC. How did it go from, the law that you voted for in 2019 to how it is now?
Yeah, well, again, and that's where legislation in this place is always tricky, and so you question as best you can, and hindsight's always perfect, I guess. But in this case, the reality is the government would have passed it whether we opposed it or didn't oppose it. Let's be clear about that. Between the Greens and the NDP, they had a majority. We thought we were doing what was right at the time based on the answers we were getting back from government when you're questioning legislation and assurances we were getting. And we do that on all sorts of legislation. This is obviously a pretty impactful piece of legislation. And then the key to any legislation is when you realize it's not working as intended, you have to be prepared to say, okay, we need to do something different. In this case, the something different is repeal it and get back to kind of that pre-DRIPA workflow of projects and consultation that we saw getting projects moving forward in the first place. This has very clearly opened a door by the very fact that the Premier has essentially staked his whole premiership on this and flip-flopping all over the place. I think it's safe to say it's gotten way out of control of what the NDP ever envisioned would actually happen with it as well. Some in the NDP are still refusing to acknowledge reality. I think the Premier, with his trying to attempt to amend, pause for a year, and then have further discussions for 6 months and still hope that somehow the nations are going to suddenly magically agree to repeal or pause. It speaks volumes to the fact that this is just spun way out of control. We need to repeal it completely. That is becoming more and more clear every day, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you reside on.
So switching to taxes, um, you've come out against some of the income tax reduction proposals from the other candidates, warning that it would increase the deficit. So I'm wondering, if you got in, which taxes would you axe and which ones would you keep?
Yeah, I've been pretty clear on this. We need to stimulate economic growth in the province, and so at its core, because I haven't heard what significant cuts they would make. You have 70% of the budget is healthcare, education, and debt servicing. Well, the banks are going to want to get paid. Teachers have protected class size in the contracts, and we're not losing students, so that can't significantly change. Nurses and other areas of healthcare need those frontline staff, so that can't significantly change. So you're down to 30% of the budget left, which is about $30 billion. And so when you're talking tax cuts of $7 billion, increasing spending on other capital projects that you need, based on the backdrop of a $13.5 billion deficit right now, those other plans right now, unless they can show significant cuts, are about a $25 billion deficit. What I'm saying is we need to find about $4 billion worth of savings, which is about 4% efficiencies. So not dramatic, not closing hospitals and schools and major cuts to frontline services, but finding those efficiencies. Take that money, transfer it over to increase our GDP output by tax changes to increase investment in light manufacturing and small businesses, the job creators out there that will actually grow our economy over and above what we've already budgeted for the economy to grow. And that will actually increase so that our deficit will actually drop over time from $13.5 billion down to 12 billion, down to 10 billion, and we can actually show a slow decline of the deficit year after year after year. Trying to pretend that we can just solve this very fast is not being honest with the public, because it's just simply not doable. As a former mayor of Kamloops that had to run government services and frontline services for people without being enabled to run a deficit, I know very well the difficult decisions you have to make in government and then the hard times you have to say no to things. So it's not about that. It's about being realistic about actually being able to still deliver the frontline services people rely on while growing and targeting the areas that will actually expand growth with tax cuts, not just these wide sweeping tax cuts that won't actually move the needle on our GDP growth, which is ultimately what we need to do to get out of deficit.
So would you agree with the statement that BC has a spending problem or a revenue problem or both?
Well, the problem with this government is that they have a spending problem. but they've baked it in so much that it's an operational spending problem. And so we've never collected more tax revenue than we're collecting right now. But we also have population increasing over the last 10 years. We've had a bit of a pause over this last year, but generally speaking, the BC population is growing. Our economy should have been growing with it. So revenues have been growing, tax revenues are growing, but we haven't seen the government actually have any fiscal constraint whatsoever. And that's why they're scrambling to try to justify canceling hospitals and long-term care facilities without using the word cancel and inventing words like repacing. And so that's why I say I think people, based on all of the sleight of hand, and I call it a game of three-card Monty that the NDP keep playing with the finances right now and with projects, I think they just want to have honest, upfront discussion about where we're at with our finances and how we're going to dig our way out of this hole. And that's why I likened it in the one debate to this isn't a high school president race. We're not promising pop coming out of the fountains. People, I think, deserve to have an honest answer, an honest path forward, a very clear, discernible way we're going to actually still provide frontline critical public services, find efficiencies where we can, and actually use those savings to actually kickstart an economy that lets the private sector truly grow, flourish, and actually grow our economy over and above what we're already projecting it to grow within the budget. And that is how you start to bring down the deficit.
Do you think the province is taking on too much? Is there anything that could be delegated to the municipal level?
Well, I think if you ask the municipal level, again, former city councillor, former mayor here, the municipalities, I think, would say, and rightly so, that they've had a lot of downloading from the provincial government, especially under the NDP's watch. There's always a bit of a push that way. Under the NDP, it's gotten much worse. And so I think we have to be careful with that. What we need to do is work with municipalities to figure out ways that they can deliver the services they're being relied upon to help bring down the cost of living and create more affordability. A good example of that is the deal Ottawa cut with Ontario, an $8 billion infrastructure program to help with pipes and pavement for municipalities so that it can bring down the overall cost of construction and development cost charges and all those governmental fees that get layered onto new construction. It's those types of programs we need to start working with Ottawa and municipalities to really, truly leverage each other to work together to bring those overall costs down from any one government, which has a net benefit result to businesses, to homeowners, to renters, to everybody. And that's the area that we need to be looking at. But this government has completely mismanaged the whole municipal file right from the get-go.
And so, in addition to your numerous political roles, you also served as on the board of BC Transit. Anyone who lives outside a major urban center in BC knows if you don't have a car, it's pretty hard to get around. What can be done to fix that without, spending and spending and spending?
Yeah, I mean, so, for the viewers, TransLink only deals with basically the Metro Vancouver area, obviously, and that's its own independent board, doesn't have a provincial government board per se operating it. BC Transit is for all the transit services, Victoria, Kamloops, small towns that have transit, Handy Dart, and that's what BC Transit deals with. So I was on that board for a few years. And so I understand the challenges coming from Kamloops. Again, as the mayor and as a city councillor, I always voted for any and every transit hour expansion we could get, but they were fleeting as you could get them. And we at least try to structure them around growth of our university to make sure that we had priority routes and extra service hours and frequency coming so that where the bulk of the people trying to use transit could get that faster service. And we saw the result. You would have more densification along those higher transit routes as well, where you had 15-minute service or half-hour service. And then the farther out you go, of course, you get less. So we have to be mindful of that. And I think coming from the interior and the north, from Kamloops, I'm the only one in this race that fully understands the complexities of that the small towns that people are relying more on transit to get to medical appointments from one small town all the way down to Kamloops sometimes, and how to make those transit systems work well and the needs of what the communities actually need is critical importance. And it's not huge dollars on the scale of things. a lot of the stuff that we can actually address for the rural and the northern areas actually require, on the scale of things, rounding error numbers from the provincial budget. It just needs someone in the Premier's chair that actually truly understands the challenges these smaller communities face to provide the type of public service, in this case transit, that people rely upon, and they don't expect SkyTrain frequency or rapid bus Broadway corridor frequency. They just simply require access to transit hours that they can then meld and shape to fit their local community needs in terms of shifts at the hospital or starting and stopping and those types of things. Yeah.
And so BC Ferries, it's, if you ran it as a business, it wouldn't make money. There's just too many routes that are not economically feasible, but we still have it because people rely on it. Do you see that model potentially expanding to a rail service, bring back BC Rail?
Yeah, it's interesting when you started that with BC Ferries, it doesn't operate at a profit. And this is part of the problem, I think, with some of the other candidates in this race is economic plan. When they talk about we have to be bold in the private business, I would not. I would call, what I'm talking about is incrementalism. But we're not a business. We're a government. And governments have to run business-like, but we're providing services that all operate at a loss for the most part, other than maybe liquor and cannabis in the case of the provincial government. And so we have to be mindful of that. So yes, you have to find efficiencies. You have to operate effectively like a business would, but you have to recognize that everything's subsidized by the taxpayer. And so in the case of ferries, I think it's safe to say that we certainly wouldn't be appointing, I wouldn't be appointing people that failed in the fast ferry fiasco to suddenly come back and save BC Ferries now when we see it getting even worse off, as the NDP has done. Those political patronage appointments that they've done have not worked well for us. We have to look at BC Ferries. We have to look at a wide range of services like that. Realize, just as we do with transit, we subsidize transit, we subsidize TransLink. And yes, we have to subsidize ferries as well to make sure that people on the island coming and going, especially for critical medical appointments and work-related issues, actually don't feel totally disconnected. You can't amass all of the specialized healthcare we have in Vancouver and then make it impossible for people from the island to make it there in time, or make it impossible for people from the north and the interior to have to incur all that extra cost to go get the same medical access that someone that lives in the lower mainland actually has access to.
Great. And so BC Rail, any hope?
Oh yeah, BC Rail. I'm a fan of, especially on the island here, protecting that corridor. I think if we allow the tracks to be removed and you'll never get them back, even if it's just removed to turn into a walking trail, biking trail. That corridor will be gone and on a constrained landmass like an island has. I think so. That's Island Rail, BC Rail in the interior in the north. Certainly, I think we have to look at all those opportunities as CN is talking about walking away from that route, because once we have those transportation corridors, they may not be relevant today, they may not be relevant 5 years from now, but as we get more and more population growth and more constrained, those rail corridors become more and more important. Maybe not for freight, but maybe they become viable in terms of people moving on something that we never imagined 15 years ago would have been a viable option, suddenly becomes. But if you don't have the corridor, 15 years from now, you have nothing to actually contemplate in the first place.
Right. And so when you're coming into Victoria from Kamloops, do you fly to Vancouver, hop on the ferry, or how do you get here?
So I drive and I'll take the ferry. The flights through Kamloops, you're always connecting through either Vancouver or Calgary. We do have one direct flight, Pacific Coastal, and it's a great flight, but it doesn't work for me going home on a Thursday. So it really depends on what my schedule for the week is, whether I fly or whether I drive. So sometimes it's predominantly BC Ferries because I find it easier to be able to stop in the lower mainland for meetings either on the way down or the way back, and not have to worry about the flight connections. But it's travel from the interior is always interesting. I'm fortunate being from Kamloops that either to Victoria or Vancouver. Vancouver's only 3.5 hour drive. And it's about 3 hours by the time you leave your house, get to an airport, get on a plane, fly to Vancouver, and then get downtown. So, I'm pretty fortunate. We have other colleagues, though, that have to get up to the north or into the Kootenays. They literally don't get home till Friday mid-morning or early afternoon, and then they're back down Sunday. So so, their travel is a little bit more difficult than mine. Mine, Kamloops is, we're literally, you're talking an hour or two difference. We're almost a suburb. We're turning into almost a suburb of the Lower Mainland because of the Coquihalla and the ease of flight connections into the Lower Mainland itself. The island is always a little bit more tricky, but that's more tricky for pretty much everyone from British Columbia because of those very few direct options people have.
And you're the only candidate in this race who's not based in Greater Vancouver. So how important is it to have that rural perspective? And do you feel like the rest of the province often gets overlooked here in Victoria?
Yeah, I think it's critically important. I think coming from the interior, Kamloops, again, as the mayor, I was very well versed on how important the resource sector is to our local economy in Kamloops. But we did a lot of work in that time frame as well to grow our tech sector, to grow our professional services sector, the economy around the university, very much like what you would find in Victoria or Vancouver. And so I've always kind of understood those two worlds and those two realms and how important they are to work together and how interconnected they actually are. A lot of our tech sector in BC is actually based on technology for the resource sector. And so, they are critically intertwined. That's why I think I do bring a unique perspective to this race. I bring a bit of interior pragmatism and common sense. I think that's been resonating with people in the Lower Mainland. We were governed as from the Premier's office for a long, long time in this province with both WAC and then Bill Bennett out of Kelowna, back when transportation and communication was much more difficult than it is nowadays between Zoom and flights and highway systems that we have, partly because of those two gentlemen. So I think people are saying, partly in the back of their minds, are saying maybe a little interior pragmatism and common sense back in the Premier's office wouldn't be such a bad thing for BC, because we did pretty well as a province when that happened in the past.
So this leadership race is shaping up to be pretty interesting because there's no clear front runner, and there's no one who's clearly the least favorite. Everyone's kind of, they got their group of supporters. And so you've kind of stayed away from mentioning more of the culture war issues, whereas some have kind of staked their whole campaign on those. Is that intentional? Do you think there's bigger fish to fry, or what's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I think, especially as a right of center party, we have to have those broad perspectives. And I've never shied away from that. And at its core, I actually agree with a lot of the underlying premise of what is being talked about in those so-called culture war issues. It's about proportionality of time, and it's about proportionality of how long you deal with a issue or not. So that's why you have a broad-based caucus, and that's why you have a lot of people, and that's why you have a broad-based party, so that you can have all of those conversations, all of those perspectives in under one right-of-center voting block. But we have to be realistic at the same time. If you want to form government, we need to spend, again, the proportion of time we spend talking about culture war, quote unquote culture war things, versus the economy, versus how people will have jobs. People that are coming home from a hard day's work that are needing to stop at a food bank instead of a grocery store are much more concerned about how is their paycheck going to grow, or will they even have a job tomorrow when they sit down at their home, or will they even be able to afford rent, or are they getting evicted? That's where we have to be mindful that we have to spend a proportionate amount of time dealing with those issues: healthcare, crime and safety, the growing that private sector economy. Those are the issues that people daily, and I base that based on what I see in my MLA inbox. And so I can appreciate maybe where some of the other candidates are coming from in terms of where they think, based on the noise on Twitter, or that what the general public is really concerned about. I'm basing what I'm talking about based on what I see in my MLA email box for the last 9 years. And it's those issues that are front and center daily from constituents coming in en masse. How come I don't have a family doctor? Why am I waiting so long to get my hip replaced? Why can't I get an MRI in a timely way? How come my job keeps getting downsized? What are you guys doing about that? Why is there no affordable housing in the city? Those are the emails that I get on a regular basis. And that's why I take, I listen carefully, and I agree with the grassroots, the party members that have those other societal concerns concerns as well. But as an MLA, I also have to listen to what the broader public, the constituents, are actually bringing to the table as concerns that they need solved immediately just to maintain some semblance of a quality of life in BC.
One issue that, as far as I know, only you have put out a public statement on is the Whitecaps and
Yes.
their future in Vancouver. I guess, who do you think is to blame for getting us into this situation? And what can we do to potentially keep the team in Vancouver?
Yeah, from what I've seen from the government, I think they really dragged their feet on this. The Whitecaps have been indicating for quite some time, and I can fully appreciate people being concerned, thinking that I'm just trying to give sweetheart deals to billionaires. That's not what this is about. This is about, first off, a government that basically walked away from having any discussions of any consequence for quite some time, tried scrambling in at the 11th hour after already agreeing with Vancouver to close Hastings Parks to horse racing for a new location, and then started trying to deal tough on BC Place leases, and they've been all over the map with no cohesive plan and no understanding of what it is they're driving towards. What I'm saying is these deals are complex. I negotiated a deal in Kamloops for our big arena with the Kamloops Blazers so we could keep the team there. And again, it worked out as a restructuring, partly for cash flow and everything else. And it worked for everybody. The taxpayers weren't further exposed. We weren't further subsidizing. It was just a way that we needed to work with the team for that trade-off and that benefit. And part of it, again, you have to weigh out. It's a public building, public asset. What is the economic spin-off by having the Whitecaps versus not having the Whitecaps? And we haven't seen that modeling done by the government to explain why they would or wouldn't entertain further negotiations. I think we have to have that broader conversation. And my plea to the Whitecaps was very simple. Don't move. Don't move until we get rid of EB and the NDP, which looks like we will. I'm more than prepared to sit down in good faith at the table, try to figure out, is there a way? There might not be a way. It might still fall off to the wayside and say this is simply the economics don't work whatsoever. But I don't have the confidence, and I don't think most soccer fans in BC have the confidence that this government has actually done that or had the skill set to actually sit in that room, negotiate in good faith, and make sure that when they say everything's been looked at but just not possible, that that's actually the case. You do that in the backdrop of them willing to put, and mark my words, it will be $1 billion into FIFA for soccer at the same time as they're turning their back on the Whitecaps. I think just sends a very contradictory message. I mean, they're putting in the $1 billion, they're cutting grants to all sorts of festivals and fairs, Symphony of Lights, all of these things to pay for FIFA. And then they're saying, but they don't really want to meaningfully sit at the table with the Whitecaps to see, is there even a possible way to save them or not? And what would that look like? And again, to me, what happens to the overall economy of Vancouver and area with or without the Whitecaps is a conversation that is very valid and worth having.
Do you think the province should be in the business of owning a stadium to begin with?
Well, we own it. I think we have to be realistic in the province the size of BC. I don't know how you would reasonably have a 60,000 person private facility that would be profitable. So I think there's ways you can try to operate it and make sure that the loss is as minimal as possible. Absolutely, we should be looking at doing that and minimizing that down. But there are some core basic services that government, again, provides that operate at a loss that regular businesses just wouldn't operate. That's why you see very few privately operated aquatic centers in BC, because they are very expensive and they operate at a loss. There's a few privately run hockey rinks in the Lower Mainland, more particularly, but the hourly rate is so expensive that it's typically men's hockey that plays there. And women's hockey, adults. It's not kids and youth that access it. So there's a fine line to walk there. And in the case of a 60,000 seat stadium, 55,000 seat stadium, I'd be hard pressed in a population of 5 million in a market like Canada to see how the fundamentals of that business would actually operate and be maintained properly as a long-term building if it was private sector.
And more personal questions here. Are you a Canucks fan?
I am a Canucks fan. Ironically, I'm also a Leafs fan, so it was a little bittersweet with the draft lottery. I was also a Sundin fan. We have the same birthday, so it's a little bittersweet. But I've been a long-suffering Canucks fan and Leafs fan, obviously. So yeah.
What's the Leafs connection there?
Honestly, and it suits me, I guess, with my being in opposition. Back in high school days, Detroit was doing quite well, and I had some friends that were big Detroit fans. Them and Toronto were always battling each other, so I did it as more of an annoyance. But then I really liked Wendell Clark and Doug Gilmour and players like that, so it just kind of stuck from that point forward. Yeah.
And so when you're not at the legislature here and not working at home, what do you like to do for fun?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I have a pretty close relationship with all of my kids. They're all grown and adults now and have little kids of their own. But I like to do a lot of things with my family. Growing up, they had a lot of sports activities. I helped coach various teams and activities they were doing as well. And so I'm fortunate. My son loves fishing and being out in the woods. And so I try to go out fishing or hunting with him when I'm back at home and then hang out at the house and do, the pizza nights and stuff like that with my daughters and their kids. And we're a fairly tight-knit family that way. So that grounds me quite a bit.
Nice.
Yeah.
I guess last question for you. So you've got winning record in electoral politics, and you mentioned that many times. Yeah. You're staking that all on this race here. So what led you to enter this race and put that record on the line?
Yeah, it's years of experience, and I want to be clear. When I was a city councillor in 2002, that's when I first started. I did that for 6 years, and then a mayor for 9. And someone said career politician. I'm not a career politician. I still owned and operated my own business at the time, all the way through being the mayor. I was still coaching and helping out in the community, and it's not that it was a part-time job, but I was able to juggle things and make it work and be busy that way. And so, others in this race will say, well, we don't need a career politician. Well, they've all tried to be career politicians other than Caroline, who's never actually had her name on a ballot. So I think that's a bit of a straw man argument in this race. For me, I realize that the experiences I've had kind of apprenticing as a city councillor and a mayor and now as an MLA, a front bench MLA, has kind of led me to realize I'm ready for my Red Seal certificate, so to speak, in governance and be in the Premier's office. I think I have a lot to offer. We have a very new and inexperienced caucus in terms of the sheer number of people that have never been elected before. And we'll add 15 or 20 more in the next election. And so if ever there was a time to have a very experienced person that's been in this building, experiencing things, dealing with the issues, understanding as a finance critic for the last 4 years, the fiscal complexities that we're going to be inheriting of the $100 billion dumpster fire David Eby's created. I think I just realized I need to offer my services up and tackle that challenge based on all that level of experience that I've developed and honed over the last 20 plus years working my way through.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.